My name is Carla Biley, and today I'm going to be talking about poverty and our youth. This topic is very important to me, in part because I do teach at a Title I school. Um, I teach at a magnet school in Richmond County, and it takes in students from all over the county, but we do have a high percentage of students that are experiencing poverty. So why is the issue of poverty so important? First thing, we must define what poverty is. So according to the Merriam-Webster dictionary, poverty is the state of one who lacks the usual or socially acceptable amount of money or material possessions. So someone who is living below whatever the average line is for that society is considered to be living in poverty. And it's also important because poverty exists in all areas of our society, from urban to suburban to rural areas. So because poverty is not isolated to one specific region, we will all we will mostly be dealing with children who live in poverty in almost every school. So there are a few exceptions, but in general, even in the wealthier schools, there are students that are experiencing poverty. um, Students living in poverty are at a disadvantage academically. They have less access to high-tech equipment and the latest programs that the richer peers may have. They may not have internet or computer at the home. Um, Also, their parents work a lot, so they may not be able to assist them with their schoolwork, and they may not be able to afford the tutors that some of the richer peers may have. Also, when we look at the schools themselves, we have to remember that schools are paid for by income tax, well, residential taxes. And because the tax base is smaller in areas of high poverty, these schools are having to make do with less money. So therefore, there's a lot of outdated equipment and rundown buildings that students in poverty are having to deal with. And in spite of these shortcomings, both students in poverty and their wealthier peers must take the same standardized tests at the end of the year. So they're all expected to show the same amount of growth, even though they're not starting out at the same starting point. So we must develop creative solutions to the problems facing students living in poverty. The same solutions that have been tried in the past do not work in today's setting. So the idea of culturally sustained pedagogy helps us to address the issue of poverty because it attempts to use the strengths of students to reach them academically instead of trying to treat them as deficient. So we're building upon the strengths that our students have with them and helping them to grow from that rather than focusing on what they may not have in comparison to their middle class white American peers. So culturally sustaining pedagogies often involve social activism, and the issue of poverty is something that activists have been working for decades to solve. So what have I learned from this class? Throughout this class, I would say the most important thing I learned is that it's important to get to know your students better. You can't cater to your students' needs if you don't know what they are. And just because they belong to a certain ethnic group does not mean that they are all alike. Students conform to different levels of cultural norms than other students. And you're not going to know where your students are at in their journey if you don't get to know them personally. So, for example, if we look at just say Hispanic students and we tried to group them all together, that's ignoring a lot of differences between them as far as country of origin and culture. Just because they may share a similar language does not mean that they are identical. And again, the way to address this is to get to know our students. So I also learned to be careful about bias and discrimination that's built into the school system. So um, it's kind of obvious by this point in time that there is some discrimination and bias that's taking place. We must remember that schools were set up to fit the model of schooling that's most appropriate to white middle class English speaking Americans. And this may leave a lot of students on the outs and has resulted in what has been called the achievement gap by those who are in deficit thinking. So I also learned that sometimes you must be willing to step outside of the group in order to do what's right. So in order to be able to make changes in our society, you must be willing to go and do things that others are not. So how do I plan to apply this knowledge? First of all, I would like to have a resource room available in each school for students living in poverty. So my county, because it does have such a high Title I population, they do have a location where students can go to outside of school. But I think that each school needs to at least have a small room available with basic supplies that students need outside the classroom, and this includes food. My school at one point during the COVID times offered meals over the breaks, but they stopped doing that since. And I would like to think that by pairing up with community partners, we could start this up again and expand upon it so that we are able to send students home not just over the bigger breaks, but also over the weekends too, because a lot of students come to school and their only meals that they are getting are from school. So I think that um, it would be a great idea to be able to expand upon what we did at one point, but have since stopped doing. Another thing that I would like to do is get an inventory of all the students who lack internet at home. So in my county, all of the students are given a personal laptop to use if they do not have one. And when a need arises, we do have Wi-Fi boxes available for students without internet usage at the house. The trouble with this is that parents have to request this, and parents may not know about the boxes in the first place. So I'll give an example. I had a student who was failing my class, and then I called home, and his father said that he doesn't have the internet at home because he just lost his job. Well, I notified him that we do have Wi-Fi boxes available in the school, and he was able to request that and from the library. And if the parents had known about this in the first place, um, it he wouldn't have fallen behind at all. So I think that we need to do a survey to see who has internet access at home and who doesn't, so that we can reach a lot more students out there and a lot more families. And these are my references that I've used for this presentation. Thank you for taking your time to listen to my presentation. I hope you have a wonderful break and a great spring semester. Thank you.